I have the pleasure to present to you. Irina Nedeva is a well-known Bulgarian journalist, and we know her from her long-time work in the Horizon program of the Bulgarian National Radio. Irina Nedeva is chairman of the board of directors of the Association of European Journalists Bulgaria, and a producer on topical issues at the Bulgarian National Radio. She has extensive experience as author of documentary films. In November 2017, Irina Nedeva was selected to coordinate the work of the Association of European Journalists on countering false news and propaganda. Henry Collis is Deputy Director for Security and Defense Projects in the United Kingdom, Prime Minister's Office and Cabinet Office Communication Team. In this role, he builds strategic communications capability domestically and internationally to help the UK and its allies achieve their national security objectives, including countering foreign interference. As part of the Cabinet Office, he has previously advised UK government leadership on issues including defense reform, national security policy, and anti-corruption. Hans Wilhelm Dunn is currently General Secretary of the Cybersecurity Council of Germany and board member of BUSET Shared Services and other business organizations. From 2007 to 2009, he was consultant to the Office of the Minister of Economic Affairs and Deputy Minister President of the Federal State of Brandenburg. Mikola Bileskov is Deputy Director of the Institute of World Policy, author of research on Ukrainian, Japanese, and Ukrainian-British relations, military assistance to Ukraine in conditions of Russian aggression, problems of neutrality. His field of study is foreign policy of the great powers, Ukrainian-American relations, military dimension of international relations. And the last our speaker, Martin Sukolov, is an expert at the Center for National Security and Defense Research at the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences and a researcher at the Sofia Security Forum. His work focuses on conventional and hybrid threats in the Balkan and Black Sea regions. Martin Sukolov's research interests include European defense, countering terrorism and radicalization, returning of foreign terrorist fighters to Europe, and developments in the Korean Peninsula. So these are our speakers. I would like to give the floor first to Irina Nedeva.
Thank you very much. I would like to express my thanks to the organizers to invite the journalists at the beginning of this important workshop. I will present to you the journalistic point of view that we were consulting inside the Association of European Journalists. This is an organization that has been created in the mid-60s, mainly by the correspondents in Brussels for the big European newspapers, broadcasters like BBC, Financial Times, Guardian, La Repubblica. In 2011, we created a national section. Basically, the association consists of 20 national sections, and the Bulgarian one is one of the youngest sections within the big family of Association of European Journalists. And last year and the year before 2016, we started to work on the concept of post-truth and relatively to the phenomenon and to the issue of fake news. Last year, the annual assembly of the association decided that it's a good idea to have somebody from Eastern Europe to coordinate the common statement, the common position of the association in the public consultation that has been opened by the European Commission on the issue of fake news. So we produced one pretty big analysis on the phenomenon of fake news and danger of political instrumentalization of the fake news that could endanger the freedom of media and the independence of journalism, especially if it is used by political elites that would like to take personal or party interest advantage of the topic of fake news. We know how the issue of fake news is used in United States with these mutual accusations of who are the fake media, who are the true one. And the association wanted to build another type of concept, of course, answering the question what we as journalists could do, but also answering the question how much the info wars and hybrid warfare is part of the fake news phenomenon. Yes, indeed, it is a part of it, but the fake news phenomenon is bigger than hybrid warfare. So we have to have this in mind. And I want to present to you, there is some slides that I would like to share with you, if it is possible. And if I have a remote. Okay. First of all, why the family of the Association of European Journalists from 20 different sections decided to have this Eastern European approach? Maybe because we very much and very well know from our past before 1989 what the whole European public spaces experience now, how much it reminds us the times when we had to read behind the lines, да четем зад редовете, както се налагаше да четем пресата преди 1989 година. На английски има много интересен аналог, интересна игра на думи се получава to read behind the lines and to read behind the lies. Because now we see that elsewhere in Europe we have to read behind the lies. And we have seen this phenomenon of fake news affecting real political decisions taken by the citizens. We see the results of different elections that have been shaped by the fake news campaigns. So yes, we could speak about hybrid cyber and informational warfare. The basic lines there: disinformation, false information, pointing the enemies, smearing campaigns, mainly campaigns that are attacking the civil society, the civic society, campaigns that are smearing the other opposition point of views, but not only, campaigns that could lead and could go are aimed at even changing the geopolitical realities in different countries. But there is a certain line that is overwhelming in all the disinformation campaigns that we experience right now, not only in Eastern Europe, but elsewhere in Europe. The line of blaming the Western European democracies and the line of fortune-telling again the decline of the West, a very famous book, as you know, and a very famous line when we speak about geopolitical and cultural wars. Some specifics about Bulgaria. We could speak about the differences between nowadays and before, because before 1989 we experienced a state-conducted propaganda. Now there is not a centralized, at least easy-proved state propaganda behind the disinformation campaigns, but we could speak about tabloid type of propaganda. Many serious newspapers and many serious media find it difficult to exist nowadays because of the changing business model of the media due to the internet, due to the social platforms, due to the new type of advertisement revenues of clickbaits, etc. But what we see is that the tabloid media is a very easy space and a very vulnerable space for disinformation campaigns, because the mere concept of tabloids counts on sensationalism, titles that could not correspond at all with the content of the article, even anonymity, anonymous sources, anonymous writers even, so it's not exactly clear who writes the opinion pieces in all these newspapers. And it's very easy to conduct disinformation campaigns in such an environment. Emotions behind disinformation campaigns: nationalism, populism, Euroscepticism, and anti-European frame in general. I will give you some examples that we started to observe 2 or 3 years ago. This is an article saying that actually blaming, accusing European Union to forbid the snowman due to the political correctness, because it was not, because they could be a racist statement or so. This is a completely fabricated line, but it corresponds to the fears of people that EU is regulating too much, which is not exactly true, but who cares? The question, the issue is how to create the fear and how to create the feeling of be pressed by some regulations. Some other examples. This is also a fabricated news, a fabricated title that Johannes Hahn, who was the EU Commissioner for Neighborhood Policy, that he wants to replace the disappearing Bulgarians with Europeans on our territory, which first appeared in 2013 in a website that was absolutely openly saying that it's not news. It's even in the title, if in the website name is written that it is not a true information, but something like a joke or the truth that could be, but it is not, something like this. It doesn't matter. In 2017, the same article, the same title, the same line appeared as a news without any quote or without any reference to this first mocking website, which shows how easy it is to build upon completely fabricated ideas presented as facts. One interesting article from a few days ago, the situation in Poland, when Poland basically found a pro-Russian group seeking to fuel tensions with Ukraine. This was everywhere in the Western press, but you could barely find such a line in Bulgarian press, in Bulgarian media. I have here some quotes from Associated Press in Warsaw and from Reuters. Another example of the proof that we have to have in mind the hybrid warfare. And you all know better than me what is the definition of the hybrid warfare. We are also familiar with the work that is done by the EU Strategic Committee Unit, in the foreign relations under the European Commission. And we think that such kind of debunking the patterns of the disinformation campaigns is very important, but it is very difficult to be followed by the mainstream media and by the mainstream audiences, because we are living in a time when it's very difficult to, after a lie, to say and to have the same dissemination effect as the lie when you debunk the lie and when you say what the actual factology or the actual facts are. It's never the same time, it's never the same place, so it's not, nobody could be sure that the same audiences would be reached by the debunking of lies and disinformation articles. Another example that I wanted to give you, but I don't want to take so much time, but we experienced something very significant in terms of information warfare on the issue of convention against the domestic violence in Bulgaria. It was very brief, very powerful, very well organized, and for the Bulgarian public, it seemed that all the actors in the debate against the convention were local, national actors. But if you just compare the campaign here and the campaign in Croatia, you will be shocked to see how many common patterns there are. I will not go into details. We asked, as Association of European Journalists, we asked one analytical company in Bulgaria, Perceptica, to do this analysis for us. So they analyzed 23 media according to Alexa, the most influential ones, together with the 3 websites that were very active on the issue of the Convention Against the Domestic Violence. You see their names. And what we saw is that basically there was a very particular period of time when all the campaign against the Convention occurred. I will not go to the details, so I will just show you this table that is showing the attitude of the media toward the Convention and toward the EU and the concept of the West, according to are they negative or positive to the Convention. And it's really interesting to see how all these media group in this chart. Other examples that I will say it in Bulgarian. Европейският съюз въвежда стандарт за презервативите и от сега нататък те ще бъдат само един размер. Not true, but powerfully spread it around. Взривяват сградата на Европейската комисия, съдържала азбест. Not true. Случаят с самолета, който беше свален над Украйна, един от най-ярките примери за масивни дезинформационни кампании. Аз вече говорих за трудностите в съпротивата и устояването на пропагандата, необходимостта да се прави факт-чекинг, но трудността този факт-чекинг да достигне същите аудитории, необходимостта да се засилят професионалните медии, да се разобличават лъжите и митовете, но проблемът с това, че те нямат същата видимост, както сензациите и подвеждащата информация. Затова в асоциацията смятаме, че е много важно не да се говори за контрапропаганда, тъй като влизането в темата за пропаганда и контрапропаганда ни връща още по-назад в времената на Студената война, а да се търсят други модели за привличане на аудиторията, която да погледне през неочакван, но интригуващ ъгъл на теми, които може би и заради европейската бюрокрация, европейския бюрократичен език изглеждат скучни за сензационни заглавия, например. Това е един подобен пример. Защо Европа? Europe, because we all have better things to do than watching at borders. Or Europe, because you don't need a visa for your next holiday in Bulgaria. Но това в сферата на PR. Това, което за нас е важно и това, което ние изпратихме като послание в анализа на Асоциацията на европейските журналисти до Европейската комисия, е необходимостта от подход, който да включва всички действащи лица и всички, които са засегнати от променената медийна среда и от променения модел на комуникация в днешно време заради интернет и социалните мрежи. А това означава не само медиите, не само традиционните медии, не само гражданските журналисти и блогърите, но и рекламодателите, и публичните власти, и националните държави, и Европейската комисия, европейските институции като наднационално ниво, което наистина може да направи обща регулация, и самите социални мрежи и онлайн платформите с едно предупреждение да внимаваме, когато даваме в ръцете на големи частни конгломерати от фирми, от компании, които вече имат монопол в това поле, когато им даваме на тях правото да казват кое е истина, кое е лъжа и когато те ни предлагат единствено с технически методи и единствено през автоматизация, през алгоритми да помагат за разобличаването на фалшивите новини в мрежата, защото една подобна тема не може, според нас, да бъде оставена в ръцете на частния бизнес и на разрастващите се, монополизирали вече определени територии, социални платформи. Между другото, много ми е интересно какво ще каже Зукърбърг днес в Европейския парламент, но пред Конгреса на Съединените щати той директно си каза и си призна, че да, ако те могат да наемат 50 хиляди факт-чекъри моментално, още сега, в момента, да започнат и да им проверяват всяка една информация и всеки един линк към новинарски източник или псевдоновинарски източник, една друга стартъп компания, например, в това поле, никога не може да си позволи подобно нещо. Представете си, когато говорим пък за медиите, и то за медиите в една източноевропейска страна или в друга източноевропейска страна, където има проблеми с прозрачността върху собствеността на медиите, има проблеми с концентрацията на медийна собственост, собствеността, крос-притежаването, например, на рекламни агенции, на медийни шопове, така наречените media shops, и на медии, които произвеждат информационно съдържание. Така че посланието от към журналистическата камбанария е да, разбираме колко сериозен е този въпрос, но той не може да бъде оставен за решаване нито само в ръцете на политиците, които могат много лесно да инструментализират темата за фалшивите новини, просто за да правят атаки един срещу друг, нито в ръцете на технологичните гиганти, а трябва да се мисли за общ подход и за осъзнаване на това колко опасни могат да бъдат подобни явления. Може би даже да се откажем от термина фалшиви новини, както предлага и Еврокомисията, и да говорим за дезинформация. И тогава се връщаме в началото, в заглавието, дали става дума за нещо ново или за старата, добре позната, би трябвало да е добре позната и да са извлечени добри уроци. Тема за пропагандата и пропагандните войни. Благодаря ви.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for your input, and journalistic point of view is really the most important maybe discourse. And I want now to give the floor to Mr. Dum, General Secretary of the Cybersecurity Council of Germany.
Yes, thank you very much. Last week we had a small election, and now I have a promotion. I have a new title. I'm the president of the council. It's a big... thank you very much. But the Secretary General is also very powerful in the council. It's both. I don't know what is more powerful. Yes, thank you very much for your invitation. I think it's a very important topic, and I think my part and my perspective is the cyber dimension, I would say. And we speak a lot about Facebook and a lot of different communication forms. And I think cyber is a very important topic. And I visited in the last months a lot of different conferences. And next week we have the CyCon from the NATO in Tallinn. And I think we have a very, very fast digital transformation. I don't know, we have some soccer players and fans here. Do you know what is the most loved application in the World Championship, in the soccer championship, in 2006? Do you know the name of the most loved application for the smartphone? Very good. No smartphones. In 2006, we had no smartphones. And a lot of CIOs, they explain me the Kicker app and so on. No, we had no smartphones. And it's a very, very fast process. And 90% of the participants, like a conference, like today, they say cybersecurity, cyber warfare, it's a very important topic. But the problem is that they go home, they go in their offices, they go in their small, medium-sized companies, in their authorities, and they say, hey, perhaps it's not so important, yes? And only 10% invest in, for example, cybersecurity. And I think it's important for today to speak about the reasons and the challenge we have. And I think we have to translate the topic to a decision-maker level. The policymakers have to understand it, the government, the member of the parliaments, and so on. In Germany, we have only a little caucus, a committee in the new government with Angela Merkel, and we have a national cyber defense center with around about 10.5 employees. It's not like in the UK, yes. And I think that is a big problem. And we have to understand it. And I think the second big problem is we speak about Facebook and we speak about modern communication and so on, but we have a big fight for talents. We have no staff in this field. That is a very big problem. And we have no education programs. We have to start in the ground school. I think that is very important. In Germany, we start with a new digitization pact. We want to invest 5 billion euros in Germany for the schools. And I think that is a good first step, yes, to understand it, to build a Raspberry Pi, to create their own computer like in Israel. Yes, they created together with the defense, with the IDF, and they take the purple and say, hey, understand it's a very, very important critical infrastructure. And the question is, today we have around about 25 devices who are connected with the internet in a normal private household. 25. And the problem is we cannot say what is critical infrastructure, what is connected with your local energy supplier, what is connected with your hospital, with your banking system, with your logistic, with the food sector. And that is a very big problem. And the other problem is we have no budget. We have to invest more in the authorities. We have a very asymmetric setting, and the attackers don't care about organigrams of our single authorities. And I think some of the decision makers think it, but that's not right. It's not a problem to attack the German Bundestag. That's not a problem. We have only 10 persons who defend such an IT infrastructure. And I think also in our discussion later is a very interesting fact, and a very important fact is we need attribution. We want to know who is the attacker behind the computer. And for that, we need forensic. We can speak a lot about fake news, but we have to know who is the attacker. And believe me, sometimes we think in our German and in the European authorities or in the international authorities that we have a Chinese attack. And everybody talks about a Chinese hub. And after 3 months, we see it's not a Chinese hub. It's, for example, a Turkish-American hub. And that is a problem. And we need forensic, we need detection, and we need deterrence capabilities. The people have to know if you do it, like a robber in a bank, we can attribute you and we can take you. And I think that is very complex. We need round about 218 days to understand that is anybody in our IT infrastructure. Over 200 days. And then we have to organize the defense or the offensive capabilities. And another topic is security by design. If I buy an aircraft, I want to fly with the aircraft. And it cannot be that you need a lot of more companies that I can go up with the aircraft and that I have a safe landing. I need a standardization. I need international standardization. Perhaps we can begin in the European Union. We have a lot of competence in the data protection environment. For example, Israel is a leading nation in IT security, yes, but they have no understanding about data protection, about GDPR and so on. And I think it's a big advantage for the European countries to do this. Yes, we need a producer's liability. I think that is very important. And in the end, I think we don't have to speak only about the technical operative discussion. Yes, we have a lot of conferences. I think we need a network of heads. We have to know each other, like in Tallinn 2007 with the attack. The big advantage was that the people know each other and they could go to the next house 200 meters ago and they know each other. And I think that is an international challenge. It's a topic without borders. And I think we have to take all the different approaches in the NGOs, because it's not easy for an authority, like in Germany, the BSI, the National Cybersecurity Authority, to coordinate this process. I think we have different fields, and we have to work together with the industry sector, with the science sector, with the authorities, with the governments, and I think we have to create a new platform. And then we can create, for example, an attribution agency, perhaps the first step in the European Union. And I think that are the 6 main topics we have to discuss also later in our discussion. And yes, thank you very much to be here, and I hope that is today also a place to generate a bigger network together and to learn each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want to give the floor to Mr. Henry Collis, Deputy Director for Security and Defense Projects in the Prime Minister Office and Cabinet Office Communications Team, United Kingdom. Thank you that you're here.
No, thank you very much. I'd like to start, of course, by thanking Sofia Security Forum, Konrad, Adenauer Stiftung, and the Center for National Security and Defense Research for hosting this excellent discussion. The title's just right. It is the new old threats to Europe. They are not new, but what is new is the speed at which they're happening. What we can learn from our past is just some of the frameworks for responding to this type of threat. So I'm going to talk about how we can build resilience to disinformation and hybrid threats, and specifically the role of strategic communications in that. You may have noticed it's been a challenging year in the UK for this type of thing, and it's been quite a testing time for us in central government. It's been challenging, but it has been a tremendous learning opportunity as well, and that includes learning from our partners and establishing the ways and means that we can continue to learn from our partners, and the way that we can sort of collectivize our response. So what I'd like to talk you through, obviously, is a quick definition of the challenge as we see it, and then talk about the role that government has in addressing that, and then specifically the role of strategic communications, and look at some of the things that we have done this year in the UK. So by way of introduction, I'm from the Prime Minister's Office and Cabinet Office Comms team. And the job of our office is the strategy, oversight, professional development of all government communications, and that includes responsibility for our national security communications, working alongside our colleagues in the National Security Secretariat in the Cabinet Office. And you may have seen earlier in the year some news about new teams that we've created in Cabinet Office to use communications to meet some of our national security objectives. So I work domestically and abroad to build capability on national security communications, and these days that includes a particular focus on countering foreign interference and within that, of course, disinformation. We use our expertise nationally, domestically, but also internationally under the guidance of our Foreign Office partners to build capability, to build networks, and to build alliances so that we can address this challenge collectively. So coming to the definitions, the problem that we face is tackling the disinformation that harms our society, regardless of the actor. And we define disinformation quite simply as false information that is knowingly shared to cause harm. And regardless of who it is that is knowingly sharing it, we have an obligation as government to address that. And our solution is a full spectrum, whole of government approach that addresses the impact of this disinformation, that addresses the threat, and also addresses the vulnerability. And as government, we have four main levers for doing this: legislation, taxation, regulation, and communication. So our definition of strategic communications in UK government is understanding and engaging audiences to create, strengthen, and maintain favourable conditions for achieving our objectives through the coordinated use of messages and products in a single theme plan. So what does that mean? The Stratcom's offer is a full spectrum of options that includes media, marketing, digital and traditional, influencer tools, but all of that needs to be based on up-to-date data, research, and behavioural science. And that's the offer that we make to our national security community in the UK. And that's been accepted, and that has become the sort of founding basis for our national security communications team. And their role is to use campaign tools alongside me building capability to support our allies, to deter our enemies, and to protect our country. So what does that look like in when something happens that is a breach of international norms, it seems clear to many who's to blame, but the culprit is intent on using the 4 Ds to make sure that they're not implicated. What are the 4 Ds? Well, these are a description of the tactics as described by our colleagues at the Atlantic Council Digital Forensics Research Lab. Dismiss, distort, distract, and dismay. This is the adversary trying to basically cover their arse and create doubt with an active disinformation campaign. It's the kind of thing that we saw after the downing of MH17, where there was a pronounced and deliberate attempt to dilute culpability. And our immediate question in Whitehall was, what do we need to do immediately? So like many security challenges, our approach thinks about this in terms of disaggregating the problem to the threat, the vulnerability, and the impact, as I mentioned earlier, and organizing our communication efforts around those things. So soon after events unfolded in Salisbury, we realized that we had to mitigate the impact, we had to counter the threat, and longer term, we need to address the vulnerability that disinformation exploits in our societies. And linking all of these things together from a strategic communications perspective, you need a core narrative, something that sets out your shop. And for us, we need this top line to be a counter brand. You were talking about using PR tactics for getting out there with a positive view of what we are, and it is essentially that is at the core of what we set out to do, to set out our counter brand and not a counter message. And in our case, our narrative, pulling all of these things together, was a statement of our values, of universal values that bind us all together, and the rules-based international order. So speaking soon after the poisoning in Salisbury, our Prime Minister made a statement that set this out. The rule of law, freedom of speech, the toleration of dissenting and minority views, a free press, fair and democratic elections, a thriving civil society. These are the foundation stones of human freedom. But meanwhile, there was a job for us in terms of crisis management. And in that regard, we needed to use our communications channels to make sure that the public were reassured about the contamination that had occurred on UK soil. They needed to know that the situation was under control. So preventing doubt and uncertainty meant making sure that those factors of fear couldn't be exploited and turned into a wider panic. In the UK, we have quite well-rehearsed contingencies for these responses based on around our response doctrine, around the role of a body called COBRA, which is our National Disaster Emergency Response Function that brings our leadership together to discuss these issues. But the next order of business was to counter what we rapidly recognized as an emerging disinformation campaign. We started seeing different explanations for what had happened emerging, other than what seemed like the most likely attribution. But from previous experience, we know, and we heard earlier, that rebutting each piece of information isn't actually productive. On the one hand, you're going to get drawn into an argument. On the other, these sort of rebuttals don't actually counter the effects of the disinformation. So led by the Foreign Office, the UK took an approach of exposing what was being done to sow doubt, pointing out the tactic and not the message in each case. And so what we sought to do was to reframe the output of the adversary within the context of their previous similar efforts, essentially saying that we knew that disinformation activity is a subset of wider active measures that are deployed to further the adversary's objectives. These are measures that range from assassinations to bribing journalists to setting up fake social media accounts that amplify the line of the day, and that we've seen these deployed in an extensive campaign around Salisbury along the lines of that pursued in the wake of other incidents such as MH17. And at first we didn't want to necessarily highlight each message, but then things actually started getting quite silly. we saw multiple explanations and narratives emerging, and not really from shadowy corners of the internet. These were actually coming from state-controlled media of the Russian state, and from, in some cases, senior political figures. And they kept coming, and the figure eventually reached over 30 different explanations that were put out through various channels for what happened in Salisbury. Some of them were ridiculous. Some of them were quite amusing. I think one of them pointed to the fact that it was the mother-in-law that was motivated to do it. Others pointed to the fact that Theresa May, our Prime Minister, had in fact invented Novichok herself. She's a very talented woman, but that sort of thing isn't necessarily within her gift. So the government worked with other governments and international civil society partners to expose this concerted campaign. We pointed out the tactic and not the measure, and we pointed out that a nation state pursuing this type of tactic is not what we stand for if we are a responsible nation that stands behind the rules-based international order. It's not appropriate way for a state to behave. And this approach of exposing disinformation allows us to reframe the debate in terms of our values. So what about that third factor, long-term resilience? Well, this is about addressing the vulnerability. And longer term, strategically, as we think about this challenge, we want to think about it in a threat agnostic way. We want to address the vulnerability with a whole-of-government response to build resilience over the long term. And we think about reframing, equipping, and responding. That's reframing the debate in terms of explaining our values. That's equipping our people and our population with the tools to challenge disinformation, and responding in real time, of course, to threats as they emerge. So that means continuing to expose the tactic when it arises and those who propagate it, but making sure that we're joined up as a government and with our allies in developing and sharing the capability to actually identify and point to the tactic. It means using communications to support policies that equip the population with digital skills and media literacy so that they can actually make informed decisions about the information they consume. And it also includes improving the information environment, improving the online environment. And that means working with social media companies and using partner networks to work with them to improve the online environment. But equally importantly, this means using our understanding of hostile actors' activity and those both state and non-state actors that propagate disinformation to identify the audiences that are most at risk, and then using campaigns, a campaigns approach to communication to instrumentalize the full range of government channels and build resilience with them. How do we do that? Well, through identifying the social, economic, political, linguistic, ethnic fissures that hostile disinformation seeks to exploit, and then identifying and countering the effects of propaganda. Don't counter the message, counter the effects. And to do that, you need to increase the flow of persuasive information to compete and to contest the information environment. Think about how do you reach those old people that you mentioned in your opening address. More than ever, reaching these audiences means getting to them with the counter brand rather than the counter narrative, contesting the information space with a positive vision of what we and our allies stand for. But the UK is not alone in this challenge. This is a problem that we've heard doesn't see borders, and we need to use all our international partnerships to stand up to this threat. We want to use all our multilateral and bilateral relationships to engage, to share information, so that we can identify those vulnerabilities and we can find the ways of reaching those populations collectively. And as we develop our longer term strategy for dealing with these hybrid threats, I hope that we will be engaging much more closely with our partners around Europe, including Bulgaria. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Collis presented the strategic communications response to the hybrid threats, and we are convinced that this sounds like a good plan for countering the the fake news, and the main responsibility is of the government leaders and government communication. So thank you. And I would like to invite our next speaker, Mr. Mikola Bieliskov, Deputy Director of the Institute of World Policy of Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Again, here I'm representing Ukraine, Ukrainian non-governmental think tank. I think, well, I've heard 3 speakers before me, and it's really interesting the event because each perspective is unique one. And again, it's an honor for me to be here with you and talk about such critical issues both Ukraine and Euro-Atlantic community countries are facing nowadays. But as I've heard all the 3 previous presentations, I think it's critically important not to talk only about the phenomena of disinformation and hybrid warfare. We also need to talk about the source of this phenomenon. And actually, it's to a great extent the one country which has transformed the hybrid and information warfare specifically into an integral part of its strategy to achieve its ultimate goals. And of course, we're talking about Russia, which in its doctrinal documents clearly defines the very existence of EU and NATO as the main threats to itself. Therefore, the Kremlin considers the countermeasures to their very existence and expansion as the main goals of its foreign policy. Now I want to divide my brief speech in 3 parts, and they are all important in discussion about information warfare. The first one is the question of why. Why information warfare and hybrid warfare in general became the main tool of Moscow's strategy. Reason number 1, as Russia's foreign policy in 2014 switched to the destruction of the current world order, information war and disinformation as such became the key instruments of achieving this goal. On the one hand, this tool is much more effective than open combat. For instance, Russia during 2014-15 in the battles in the Donbass got a very good lesson that excessive reliance solely upon military force, no matter how much its armed forces are modernized, doesn't ensure the desired end effect. Instead, pro-Russian sentiments were discredited on territories under the control of Kiev as the consequence of Russian open military actions. Therefore, we should expect that Russia will return, and actually it's returned, to the active use of various techniques of information manipulation to achieve its goal. In this case, military factor will play only secondary or auxiliary role. The cost of open, full-scale combat are significant, and the results, as I show, they are ambiguous and often directly opposite to the desired one at best. At the same time, information wars and warfare disinformation campaigns aim primarily at suppressing the will to resistance and reality perception as such, create much more opportunities for effective realization of Russian goals. Reason number 2, the use of tools of influence through dissemination of disinformation is a rather cheap instrument that allows Russia to reduce the overall gap in a power potential with the West. Moscow cannot compete with NATO and EU in soft power, in economic potential, in technologies. However, through purposeful activities in new and old media, they create good opportunities for asymmetric mitigation of Russian weaknesses in traditional force resources. And also reason number 3, it was partially mentioned by my colleagues, but I think it should be emphasized once more. The development of new technologies, including the emergence of the internet and the networks, social networks, created for Russia qualitatively new opportunities for projection of information power, if we can say such, as seen as influence of information power and influence on the territory of countries of the Eastern European Partnership and West in general. The Soviet Union could only dream about such an opportunities that new technologies opened to Russia in conduct of information affair. In essence, post-industrial information era opened the boundless opportunities for Moscow to work with target audiences all around the world. Information war was transferred on the territory of the enemy and has long been conducted there. So the second important element I want to talk about is, of course, the goals of the information warfare, and they may differ. In the case of Ukraine, and I was invited by organizers of this event to tell about specifically Ukrainian context, Ukrainian experience. In case of Ukraine, the very targets of the Russian disinformation campaigns were to influence and to destroy the very readiness to resist among Ukrainians, to undermine the ideology of Ukrainian statehood, and to prevent the formation of modern Ukrainian ethnicity. Especially these goals of Moscow were clearly visible at the initial stage of the current confrontation in order to prevent the resistance to blitzkrieg in a form of Russian Spring. When this plan in 2014 failed and a confrontation between Ukraine and Russian Federation became a protracted one, Russian information attack and special operation were oriented to the elimination of the legitimacy of the current Ukrainian government in order to undermine the commanding vertical, exploitation of the Ukrainian social and economic problems, spread panic and pessimistic sentiments in general, and of course ideas of peace at any cost. And even now we expect that in 2019 Ukraine will again feel the full potential of Russian machine of the information warfare. Simultaneously, it most likely be not only directed to the support of political forces favorable to Russia, but also to the spread of the chaos and paralysis in general if pro-Russian forces cannot be brought to power in Ukraine. Under condition when Ukraine became the major object of the Russian disinformation campaign, of course, Moscow within the framework of information warfare tries to achieve other goals in countries of the Euro-Atlantic community. First of all, we are talking to the prevention and then undermining of the unified EU and NATO position towards Russian aggression against Ukraine. Also significant efforts were directed toward the undermining of the sanctions regime. And the last thing, Moscow also did not forget about the spread and legitimization in Western countries of its own formula of the settlement of the so-called Ukrainian crisis. I want to pay special attention to this formulation, Ukrainian crisis. Not Russian aggression against war, but Ukrainian crisis, civil war. It's also even formulations, specific formulations and the description of phenomena, they can be very powerful and useful tool in the information campaign. And so Russia was spreading its own version how this Ukrainian crisis can be settled. And we were talking about the implicit, at least implicit, recognition of the occupation and annexation of Crimea and of course federalization of the rest of Ukraine. However, I want to draw attention to the fact that the Western countries, our NATO, EU partners, they should not be under illusion that they are only secondary front of the Russian disinformation warfare. As we know today, in last, we can say 2.5 years, Russia tried at least to influence to its favor the following events: the referendum in the Netherlands, the referendum in the United Kingdom, the elections in United States and in France, and also referendum in Catalonia. So I also want specifically to emphasize that you here and in other different European countries should not be under the illusion that you are only the secondary front. And those techniques that were first tested in Ukraine, because actually we are the major battleground and the first field to test those techniques, the techniques that were tested yesterday on Ukraine or will be tested tomorrow on Ukraine, the next day they can be also directed against European and North American countries. And again, the last thing, it's also about countering, the major point of this discussion. The main positive thing, first of all, that I can say about the countering of those phenomena is that finally European and American leaders, at least not leaders, but representatives of Trump administration, they start to talk about this very phenomena. It's very important one, because when you recognize the fact that you are under attack, it's the first step to the effective counteraction. My colleagues in the first presentation, they specifically mentioned the first measures proposed, and those measures will be undertaken by the EU also. It's good to just to hear proper words to be used, to hear from the leaders of the EU, NATO, Germany, for example, that Europe also is facing the hybrid threats, information threats. It's also very important. And about the problems of countering those disinformation techniques, they are one. The first problem, we can't just do as Russia does. We can't just distort the facts. Actually, if we do like this, it will be the major gift for Russia, because Russia can use those techniques, the theatrical application of the Russian techniques to delegitimize and undermine the image of the West. And another problem is to how maintain the balance between the freedom of speech and press and the fight against disinformation and propaganda. Finding this balance will be a very difficult task. At the same time, such attempts will create another good opportunity to Russia to speculate about the cynicism of the West, for which there is no freedom of thought, but only attempts to destroy any alternative. But despite all these problems, the problem of countering disinformation is relevant as ever. It's good sign that Western countries and the Western institutions have taken first steps. For instance, it's positive that last year some Russian media were forced to register as foreign agents in the United States. It's a positive sign, the Facebook decision to monitor content to find evidence of purposeful disinformation, to remove it. Maybe the one very practical tip in this context from the Ukrainian experience: we need to talk not only about the governmental effort, but about the coalition of efforts, the coalition of governmental efforts, the coalition of the business and non-governmental organization. For instance, in Ukraine, we have on the one hand the Ministry for Information, but the results of this, the function of this ministry is ambiguous at best. We can say that it's a very successful one. On the other hand, we have a number of non-governmental initiatives, private initiatives, like InfoResist, InfoNapalm, Stop Fake, and those private citizen initiatives, they are much more successful in countering. And maybe in this context we can draw the lessons from the Russian experience, because we know the Russian government rely on private contractors, on private firms, and the non-governmental organization and union to implement their own goals. And also, the last thing to mention, briefly my colleagues and Mr. Collins specifically said about it, I also calling for not only reactive policy, but to creation of the specific resilience among population of the Eastern Partnership countries, among countries of EU and NATO, to Russian disinformation warfare, to the Russian disinformation and distortion of information techniques. Because only if we will be proactive, so we will left to Russia the very possibility to, the freedom of action and the ability to set the rules of the game. So only reactive policy is not enough. So we have to build the resiliency to Russian disinformation campaign, and only through these methods we can not only withstand the constant information attacks and from the Kremlin, but to force Kremlin to switch from offense to defense. Thank you.
Thank you for this contribution, because the Ukrainian perception of the hybrid warfare, disinformation is extremely interesting. So thank you for your perceptions. And we have one more speaker, Mr. Martin Sukhov, who is from Center for National Security and Defense Research, Bulgarian Academy of Science.
Thank you. First, I would like to thank my distinguished fellow panelists for raising the bar. And that's actually the reason I think it would be best to put away my prepared remarks and try to put in my thoughts and some ideas to what they've already said. Also, I don't see my boss in the audience, so I think it would be okay if you don't tell him. Now, first, as I did with the entire title, I'm going to begin with a short story. It was in my second year of my bachelor's degree, and I was in a class of modern strategy. And about halfway through the first lecture, our professor turned to us and said, look, no matter how much you think your idea is new, original, if you read enough, you're going to find somebody from the Middle Ages who has already thought about it and written about it. So this is on how new these threats are. They've always been there. It's in their nature. Looking at hybrid, what's that? That's the combination between conventional, non-conventional means, or non-conventional, other non-conventional means, but still to achieve a specific goal. And that interplays with warfare. Warfare itself is based on two things: continuity and change. Continuity is the nature of warfare. That is always there, to put your enemy to do your bidding. You have to force him to do that. So in a sense, continuing the political goal. You know, Clausewitz once said that war is the continuation of politics by other means. Yes, nature of warfare. Change. That, however, pertains to the adaptive nature of warfare itself. Whatever the changes are, you know, pertaining to developments in technology, culture, general international environment, they will be utilized by warfare when you want to wage it. And of course, as later as I go on, you will see that specifically with disinformation. Now, because I would also like to say a few words about Russia, I'm gonna put it before that, it's not only Russia who wages hybrid warfare. One, because as I said, it's been around for quite some time. Two, the most popular example of hybrid warfare and how to properly wage it before Russia's invasion of Ukraine was actually the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. The level of information warfare, of the blending of guerrilla and military tactics, everything was there for somebody to say, yes, this is hybrid warfare, we need to study how this is happening. Two, 1999, two Chinese scholars actually developed and published the book under the name Unrestricted Warfare. And they said it bluntly, I think it was on page 3, that the first rule of unrestricted warfare is that there are no rules and nothing is forbidden. They argued because of globalization, warfare has moved away from the conventional military realm and into more spheres. They argued that there could be financial warfare, that they could be computer hacking, that can be information warfare, terrorism, urban warfare. Everything was allowed in unrestricted warfare. Now, I'm putting this because it should, or at least I'm guessing this reminding you in many ways of Russia's operations, especially in Ukraine. Now to Russia. First of all, hybrid warfare, гибридная война, doesn't sound very Russian. It kind of doesn't fit into their literature. And it's because it isn't. It's how they came to perceive what's happening in the West. Now, what I'm going to say, I don't advise you to accept it. You shouldn't. But I think it would be well to accept that this is how in Moscow they see the world. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, they came into the victim mentality, paranoid that the enemy is everywhere, so believing that international institutions, non-governmental organizations, the West in general, everybody's against them. And so they started figuring out, wait, how do they do that? We got to develop our own strategies to deal with this or even match it. So they did. They started working on new generation warfare, which has basically now become very famous thanks to the so-called Gerasimov doctrine. But the fact that they utilize so much information, so much propaganda, several means, especially such as psychology, strategic investments, energy, just goes to show that they see everything as an instrument. They see warfare as a permanent engagement. It's not something that happens as a result of consequence of events or the lack of that consequence of events. They believe it's constant. And here we are at this point where we're constantly engaged in a hybrid not warfare, but hybrid engagement with Russia. Now, we also got to point out that, as my colleague mentioned before me, the technological, economical, ideological supremacy of the West compared to Russia is without a question. The dominance is there. Hybrid means, hybrid methods, hybrid warfare in general is there as a means to catch up. In this sense, hybrid warfare is not an act of strength. It's an act of weakness. It's your attempt to find or create weaknesses which you can exploit for the gains of your state. But of course, this can fire back. Now, just the other day, and by the other day, I do mean on Sunday, a colleague of mine brought to my attention what happened in the city of Narva. Now, this is a city in eastern Estonia, as much as I found, third largest city, and very pro-Russian. 93% of the population there are Russian-speaking. 36%, over 36 actually, I think, have Russian passports. So the interesting thing was that Russia was able to mobilize them to a certain point, like that would threaten them, that Estonia was trying to take away their culture, their identity, etc. And they were under threat. So it was Russia, Moscow particularly, was able to mobilize them through its media that they got to favor pro-Russia positions that favor Russia, vote in a specific way. And that ended at about 2014, for the reason that the situation in Ukraine happened. Now, this was a breaking point for the very strong pro-Russian people, those who were very strong in the city of Narva, because in a way, they came to the grim prospect that you might actually get what you want. Russia doesn't serve as an economic alternative, doesn't serve as an ideological alternative. It doesn't serve even as a reliable ally, I would say. So they kind of went a step back and said, well, okay, we still want to watch Russian news, but we don't want to be like in Russia. So we can just enter the European Union and follow the news. That would be much better. So this, in a way, backfired. So let me move, please, because I'm looking at the clock, to specifically misinformation and disinformation campaigns. Of course, a major component regarding hybrid warfare. Again, Russia, especially the past couple of cases, I would say that they like to approach, after a certain event, information warfare, it's sort of like grabbing a shovel and throwing a lot of theories out there just to create the illusion that other possibilities are valid. And this is actually further augmented by the fact that because there are a lot of pro-Russian media outlets there, websites, televisions, not all of them state-controlled, but this grants illusion in the reader, the viewer, the listener, that actually this information comes from different places, which kind of begins validating itself from one piece of fake news to another piece of fake news. Well, it kind of becomes a form of reality for them. And here maybe it's possible to remind what Peter Pomerantsev once said, that Putin's Russia doesn't bother with petty disinformation. It seeks to reinvent reality. Now, another way to do this is pretty much, I think it could best explain by using mathematics. 2 plus 2 is 4. But if there were an office, a head office of Russian propaganda that I could take it to and give them a piece of paper, see, 2 plus 2 is 4, I think that they would go, 4 is a number, like 5, like 6, like 13, like 100, etc. So 2 plus 2 is a number. Don't prove to me that 2 plus 2 is 4. Prove to me that 2 plus 2 isn't 100. So you got to work all your way through, like, the 2 plus 2 is not the other numbers, which requires much more effort, much more time. And at the end, it might not even be that much useful, because Russian media kind of likes to play the role of switching topics a lot with something like in bold italics, very grabbing titles, always to make you go while you're talking about some crisis somewhere. Oh, shiny! So let me check out this link, and it's kind of in a way to distract you. But what does it want to achieve with its disinformation, with general hybrid threats? What is it? Well, would it be to annex more territories, repeat the situation from Ukraine? I sincerely doubt it. I mean, even if they wanted to, I don't believe they have the capabilities. Is it to provoke some more conventional conflict? I sincerely doubt that too. Push chicken game with the US to go to nuclear warfare? That is also extremely unlikely. Threaten to cause the dissolution of the EU and NATO? I don't think that, I actually think that they know they cannot do that. But what they can do is actually challenge unity and disrupt the decision-making process by causing divisions between the societies of the separate member states. I think this is the main goal of misinformation, to cause a bipolar system within the people in the different states. This way, distracting and impeding any chance of having, well, not any chance, but most chances of standing in unity in the face of Russia. So, what to do? Well, the question is, what do you want to achieve? Because right now, I'm talking about Russian threats stemming from Russia, but it's declining power. Its economy is not doing well. Demographically speaking, they're also in decline. They have a lot of problems. So, tomorrow, in a couple of days, couple of years, the major source of hybrid threats to Europe, to NATO, to the region may not be Russia, may not be a state, maybe something else. So in the long term, if you want to become more resilient, if you want to deal with hybrid threats, what you have to do, because remember that hybrid warfare seeks to either find or create weaknesses, well, the answer is to be less weak. And in a democratic state, that means more democracy. Strengthened independence of the judiciary, the independence of the media, enhanced civil society. It's all the basics of actually democracy. So the question of how powerful is hybrid warfare, how useful it is, actually begins within the different states, within the alliances, and also from every individual. Well, I'm going to stop it here. Please feel free to ask me any questions.